Good afternoon, councillors, staff and members of the public who join us for our council meeting of the 9th of March. I officially open the meeting at 1 p.m. Please be seated. In opening the meeting, the City of Launceston acknowledges the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respect to elders past, present and future as they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hope for generations to come. We recognise and value Aboriginal histories, knowledge and lived experiences and commit to being culturally inclusive and respectful in our working relationships with Aboriginal people. In opening the meeting, we note that all councillors are present with the exception of Councillor Harris, who is on leave, and Councillor Walker has made his way to the table. Item 3, declarations of interest. In accordance with Part 2, Regulation 8.7 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations of 2015, elected members are requested to indicate whether they may have any pecuniary or conflict of interest in respect to any matter appearing on today's agenda. Are there any councillors wishing to declare such an interest today? There being none, we'll move to item 4, confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the City of Launceston held on the 23rd of February be confirmed as a true and correct record. Someone to move that recommendation. Thank you. Councillor McMahon has moved. Councillor Palmer has seconded the motion. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. It's carried 11-0. Item 5, council workshops. Council workshop report of workshops held on the 23rd of February and the 2nd of March. The recommendation being that council notes the council workshops conducted and attendance listed as described. Someone to move. Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. A seconder. Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, please, Mayor. I want to make a particular note of the Aboriginal Partnership Plan and also the next tranche in our investigation on short stay accommodation in Launceston. There's a lot of community interest, particularly in that item, and it's just the next step in us understanding exactly what our community needs when it comes to Airbnb and other suppliers.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Seconder, Councillor Mackenzie. Any councillor wish to speak to council workshop report? Councillor Dawkins, anything further? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. Item 6, councillors' leave of absence applications. These will be considered in closed council, agenda items 20.2, 20.3 and 20.4. Item 7, community report. We welcome Amanda Pereira today, who is going to provide a community report with regard to her work in Launceston. Amanda, welcome to council. We'd love you to use that microphone just at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Gibson and councillors, and thank you for inviting me here today and giving me the opportunity to give my humble experience of how moving to the fair city of Launceston has accelerated my career. Who am I? You may not know me. My name is Amanda Pereira. I'm an installation artist and I create and manage the exhibition of exhibits around the world, and I live here in Launceston. I run a business called Pereira Studio, and it's run out of HQ over there in Trevellyn, and I have a team that work with me that, well, I'm the principal creative, but I have a team that work with me that help me create, design, manage and promote the movement of my giant art installations globally. So how do we do this? Well, we have production houses in hubs around the world. We have one in Melbourne, one in Pittsburgh and one in Spain, and what they do is they house, they store my artworks and they prepare them for exhibits in each of those regions. And we also have technicians in those regions too that attend the bookings and obviously the installation and the exhibition of those particular artworks for events. So that's a snapshot of my career today. But it certainly wasn't like that in 2006 when I first moved here with my husband and then firstborn. Since moving here, we've had 2 more children. So I graduated in art school in 1991 and tried to get my art career going in Sydney, but it proved quite difficult with all the pressures that a big city offers. So we moved to Launceston for a range of reasons. One of them was to allow me time to focus on getting art career going and also offer our children experience of nature that northern Tasmania, specifically this region, has to offer. So artistically, it was also a very good move as well because in a big city, you may internalise as an artist and get inspiration from the inside as opposed to inspiration from the environment outside. And upon moving here, my visual language broadened dramatically because it was inspired by the dramatic landscapes and skyscapes that are on offer here. My themes in my artwork is man's relationship with the natural world, and that was inspired by an experience that I had where I witnessed man, let me explain the story, it's probably better. So I was luckily invited to the Galapagos Islands with my uncle, who's a natural history filmmaker. He was making some films there for the BBC, ABC, National Geographic. And we were up there in the northernmost island, and he was filming whale sharks there in a place called Whale Shark Alley because they just frequented there so much. Anyway, divers were in the water filming, and I was in a dinghy, and they were coming. I was like, jump in. And there's a whale shark directly underneath the boat. So I, without thinking, I just put on the mask, jump in, and my vision was filled with brown and white spots, and it was this giant whale shark. And I just spent the rest of the day swimming, watching the whale sharks and the fish. But the next day, there was a sound of another boat that came, and it was an illegal fishing trawler, keeping in mind the Galapagos is an international marine park. And we were told by the locals on the boat that we shouldn't intervene because they probably had guns. So all we could do is just sit and solemnly watch as they indiscriminately scooped out of the areas of the ocean that we were just there the previous day and just filled their hull, which was the size of an Olympic swimming pool. Anyway, so that caused a lot of passion for me, and in terms of what I could do with those feelings, I channeled them into my themes and my artwork, hence man's mismanagement or relationship with the natural world. So I'd found my themes. Now, moving to Launceston, I hired a room in the old Coates Patents building there. It was big, airy, somewhat dusty, but I spent the next 8 years being inspired and getting in the car with a camera and chasing cloudscapes and dramatic landscapes to feature in my paintings, and throwing in the odd feral species to as a symbol of these feral species dominating the natural world. So the species were pigs, deer, and rabbits. My first rabbit painting was of a giant rabbit sitting amongst the marsh at the bird sanctuary up the Tamar River, and that made the Glover Art Prize. And I went to the opening, and it was the people from agriculture that got it straight away. They said, "Oh yes, I get that, I understand that," because they were quite eager to tell me their experience of how destructive their rabbits were on their property. Am I out of time?
One more minute.
One more minute? Okay. So that developed into my giant art. So I found a way to bring out the two-dimensional giant feral species into the real world by using the medium of inflatables. And they were first exhibition in 2014 in Sydney, and I haven't picked up a paintbrush since, and I've been exhibiting installation artwork around the world ever since. But why I like public art? Public art is inclusive. It helps them maintain social cohesion, even if they explore some more complex aspects of the human condition. Public art is egalitarian. It's about communication, and I love the potential of my art communicating to many people as opposed to a few who may understand art or who may be able to afford to buy art. I love the way people who maybe experience my work may not even know it as art. So call me a romantic, but I believe that by examining the challenges that our society and communities face from different perspectives, the arts can contribute to social change. Man, my artwork Man, when it was exhibited on the basin in the gorge for Mona Foma in 2019, the Launceston community embraced this artwork. For that time, Tasmania, Australia and the world saw it uniquely ours, uniquely Launceston. So I believe the public arts reflect the community and its surroundings, creating cultural identity by setting a community apart from any other and attracting people to its uniqueness.
Great, thank you, Amanda. And certainly that image of your man in the gorge was shared around the world and back again. So congratulations and thank you for your work. Item 8, public question time. Starting with 8.1, public questions on notice, a response provided at 8.1.1 regarding delegated authorities, 8.1.2 regarding intellectual property concerns, 8.1.3 regarding the housing crisis. I'll now ask Elizabeth to read the guidelines before considering public questions without notice. Thanks, Elizabeth.
If you are participating in public question time, please move to this microphone and state your name and address. You may then ask up to 3 questions. Please direct your questions to the Mayor. The Mayor may refuse to accept a question. If this happens, reasons will be provided. If your questions are accepted, they will either be answered at this meeting or taken on notice and answered at a future council meeting. Debate or discussion about questions or answers is not permitted.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Are there any public questions without notice? Sure, come to the mic.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gibson and councillors. I'm Kirsten from Strike It Out Inc. We're located in Newstead and we've been a grassroots organisation for the past 6 years, helping the people that are homeless and emergency need here in Launceston. Last Friday on the 3rd of March at approximately 5 p.m, I had an emergency phone call from a state government service to attend to a homeless person with 2 young children. All their belongings had been removed from the campsite, including their bikes, clothes, tents, microwave, etc. On that same evening, I had another 2 single-parent families with young children, one who had previously been sleeping on the floor of the Woolworths car park in Launceston. They were contacting me after exhausting every other avenue, asking where they can go to set up in a safe space to set up their tents. They didn't even have tents, so I'd have to provide them. And could I help them out? That exhausted every other service or any other accommodation provider with nowhere to go. To be told by local government that it's a state government's problem to find accommodation. Again, we set this lady up with her 2 children, we set them up again, but lacking the basic amenities such as toilet, shower and cooking facilities. So far this week I've organised with the Launceston City Council to provide a portable toilet to that space and also to have the rubbish to be collected. So what is the answer to this situation that keeps reoccurring week after week? Where do I tell people to go that is a safe space for single parents and children and in desperate need of help? Somewhere where their belongings will not be destroyed or stolen. Somewhere where they can sleep safely overnight. Strike It Out Inc. have attended meetings with Launceston City Council requesting what green spaces are available, that such a space could be set up with providing the basic amenities, to the response that there's nothing available. Strike It Out Inc. have currently spent over $100,000 of public donations on our mobile sleep pod project, which will sleep 7 people, provided with portable mobile showers and basic kitchenette, and the toilets provided by the Launceston City Council. We're complying with all regulations. This project, we're hoping, will definitely be ready before this winter hits. We just need some help. We need some help to find somewhere to set this up. So Strike It Out Inc., we went looking for a place, and there's, at the moment, down Lamont Street in Invermay, is part building locked up that used to be the Youth Futures training facility. It's a fenced space, gives easy access for us to transport the mobile infrastructure into that space. We're just still waiting to hear back a response in relation to that property. If that is to no avail, we'd like to know, where is there somewhere for us to set up our project? Can you help us, or anyone know of anyone who can help?
Thanks, Kirsten, for
Thank you.
again raising your questions. Firstly, can I acknowledge the work that you and your volunteers are doing in this space? We understand the need, we understand the challenge, and we're appreciative that groups such as yours are doing all they can to help members in our community who find themselves at risk or experiencing homelessness. Can I also say we acknowledge the work that we've partnered with you on pertaining to the lockers and the work that we've undertaken so far, trying hard to locate a location for the pods. What I think I'm going to do today, the councillors have all heard your questions. We'll commit at next week's workshop to talking further about the issues that you've raised and provide a more wholesome response at a subsequent meeting. Are there any additional questions from the public? It's my pleasure at point 9 to welcome the first of our deputations. And today we welcome from Tasmania Police Inspector Nathan Johnson, who's going to join me at the front here in order to provide information update to Council and the community with regard to the Launceston district. So Nathan, a big welcome to you. We'll press the button closest to me to turn the mic on. Excellent. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. As the Mayor said, my name's Inspector Nathan Johnson. I've been the Inspector in charge of the Launceston Division, which is the General Duties Division that encompasses Launceston and a little bit down the river for Riverside. I've got 105 operational members who provide the 24-hour general duties response to issues that come up, along with looking at, I guess, other antisocial behaviours and investigations of lower level matters. So the commitment that Tasmanian Police has given to the Launceston area is that we will always have 24 hours a day, 2 sergeants and 8 constables that are working 24 hours a day within Launceston. So that is our minimum staffing numbers that we always have within Launceston. I guess my commitment as a part of that is to ensure as best we can, as the new Commissioner wants, and has been my commitment over the last 2 years, is to do the high visibility type policing that we know there are perception issues with antisocial behaviour, especially within the Launceston CBD, and I know there's been a lot of issues around the Village Cinema at the western end of Brisbane Street. And so my commitment has been over the time to try and have people out on foot patrol, understand the significance of high visibility policing and how it does impact on not just people being safe, but also the perception and feeling safe, and that's a big part. I know it's a big thing for the City of Launceston that people want to feel safe in that CBD. So I guess over the 2 years, one of the things that I've had to do to achieve that is change the way Launceston Division looks. So we've been lucky enough to get some extra people added into Launceston is one part, but I've had to move some people from Newnham Newton Police Station, who now work 24 hours a day at Launceston. So the reason behind that is to mean that there is more police at night in Launceston than there was before. So Newton previously was a investigation type setup, so they weren't first responders. They would do lower level investigations and assist the CLB with more of that type of work. Whereas now, I guess the way that we've done to achieve providing a high level of policing service is that we front end our work. So we try and do as much as we can upon initial attendance to try. There's a number of positives with that, as in we identify offenders early, we interact with them, we try and recover stolen property. So that's some of the changes that we've done in Launceston over the last 2 years. I guess one of the other things which we've done more recently is ran a task force. So they're over in Launceston. I'll leave the name out, but there's been 6 officers, which have been a mixture of Launceston CIB who have targeted the antisocial behaviour, shop stealing. We've had some really good results, and I'm leaving this to do some more media on that. But the task force has had some excellent achievements and have done really well in identifying recidivist shoplifters. So that one of the issues that I identified was we didn't know who we were dealing with. So we had a group that had spent some time to try and identify who's moving throughout the community, and we've linked that in with our youth crime intervention unit. And so we've got a youth element involved, but to try and offer those people the support, and especially through the holidays and returning back into the education system, to try and redirect and get our supporting partners to assist us in getting the youth the support, the help that they need to try and be valuable members of the Launceston community. I guess the big focus for me over the last 2 years, and I've been very lucky because I've made some really good relationships throughout the city of Launceston, but also through the safer community partnerships, the work with the homelessness, to really understand that, I guess I understand that we don't have lots of tools to use. Unfortunately, we can only do 1 or 2 things. So it's about the collaboration and working with the City of Launceston and working with the NGOs and other agencies to try and partner a response a bit wider than just policing our way out of problems. I understand that that's not a great strategy. It's not something that in the long term we're going to achieve really positive results in Launceston. The task force is an example of throwing police resources will have an immediate impact, but it doesn't have the long-term impact that we need to try and look at to try and build capacity within Launceston. So I guess for me, over the last 2 years and into the future, continuing to build relationships, and that's why I was lucky enough for the Mayor to invite me here to put a name to some faces, and for you to understand that anything that you have, any problems, feed them to me. Building relationships with Lindy and understanding the links that she has to the retail network is really valuable for me to get that information as soon as, and same with Susie, as soon as possible, so that I can keep it at the lowest level and I can target my activities, or the guys' activities on the road, to the problems that you see, and also the problems that, whether the data supports it as being real, if there's a perception of safety issues, then that is a problem and we need to change that perception as well. So feed the information back to me. I like to fix things at the lowest level and try and build the relationships so that for the antisocial and the shop stealing, we can fix things as well. And the other big focus has been emergency management and the Launceston flood plan. So that's something that's been some really good work that we've been able to do, and in Launceston build some strong relationships with SES and get some right people in to try and look at having a really good response capability, so we understand when a flood hits, that's a massive risk to the Launceston community, but also the front end, so building capacity within the Invermay community so they understand what they need to do. So I guess moving forward, for me, it's going to be continuing to target things like shoplifting. So shoplifting's up in Launceston, so that's something that I need to focus on. And also the antisocial behaviour, that not just in Launceston CBD, but we've got issues at Kings Meadows. So unfortunately, we hit them hard in Launceston, they moved to somewhere else. If we can't get the support structures around to get people back in schools, unfortunately, it makes it a challenge because people move and the behaviour continues. So I guess my commitment is to, when I can, have the high visibility policing, not just in Launceston CBD, but in Mowbray, Kings Meadows, and any other areas that are identified, but also to work with the other parts of NGOs and government organisations to try and give people the support that they need, not just policing, because I know that unfortunately we can't police our ways out of these problems.
Great.
Yeah, so any questions? I can take questions and deal with them today, but also I'm very big. Lots of people have my card, and if you want to get my contact details, the Mayor has them, and I'm willing to share them with anyone that wants to try and fix any problems or just build relationships and have conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Inspector. And we certainly appreciate your willingness to come along in open council and to provide an update. That's appreciated. Councillors, I'm sure you will agree that that's been appreciated. Those details will be provided, and offline you'll be able to follow up with any direct questions to the Inspector.
All right.
Thank you for your
everybody.
work. Item 10, Planning Authority. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in the agenda. Item 10, Planning Authority. I'll ask Elizabeth to read the guidelines for speakers.
If you are speaking to an item on today's agenda, the Mayor will invite you to come forward to the microphone. Please state your name and address. You may speak for up to 2 minutes, either for or against the recommendation. You will hear this sound when you have reached your time limit. You may not ask questions or enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Your statement is not to be defamatory, inappropriate or abusive, or be intended to embarrass any person. The Mayor may direct you to stop speaking if you do not follow these rules or if your statement repeats points that have already been made.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. 10.1, DA 0744 2023, 10 St George's Square, Launceston, residential, the demolition of existing dwelling and construction of a new dwelling. We do have a number of speakers as Councillor Pentridge departs the meeting at 1:27. I'd invite our first speaker, Paul Blest, to come to the microphone.
Paul Blest, 4 Scott Street, East Launceston. Mr Mayor, councillors, many of the issues of concern related to the proposed development of 10 St George's Square would have been dealt with in the various submissions. So in the allocated 2 minutes, I'd like to address another but related issue, that of community culture. It's common for the dismissive term "not in my backyard" to be used when a development of any kind is proposed, the implicit suggestion being that a new development would be opposed no matter what. Contrary to this attitude, since purchasing our property at 4 Scott Street, we've been made welcome by neighbours and have become aware of the variety of developments that have taken place on their initiative and are still taking place. Having spent significant time living on Queensland's Gold Coast, it is noticeable that there is much more of a sense of community, and particularly in this part of Launceston. Certainly it is partly due to the coffee culture and the proximity of pleasant open spaces, but it also relates to the live and let attitude and mutual respect that we have encountered. Fundamental to this is that whether as newcomers or long-term residents, we all have rights and interests, and of course they overlap and can sometimes cause conflict between neighbours. Crucial here is how these issues are dealt with. We are not so naive as to believe that the developments in the area would never take place, but rightly or wrongly at the time of writing, with regard to the development proposal for 10 St George's Square, we have a sense that significant implications for neighbouring properties have not been fully addressed. In our case, it is the proposed demolition of a wall which would have a significant impact on existing amenity and infrastructure. and there is more. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for joining us today. Next on my list is Elizabeth Gatenby.
Councillors, my name is Elizabeth Gatenby and I live at 1 Spencer Street, which shares a boundary with 10 St George's Square. The proposed two-storey form extends the balance of my rear boundary unbroken, causing significant amenity impacts to my property. Following the review of the amended plans, my concern lies solely with the unacceptable overlooking impact to my secluded private open space, which has a singular outlook towards the subject site. My view will now be fully enclosed by the proposed dwelling. It is also my only secluded private open space within my property, of which I rely on heavily due to the amenity it offers me. My objections are based on the following grounds. The proposal does not comply with clause 846A1B of the scheme, as it proposes an unscreened balcony less than 4 metres from the rear boundary of my property. The proposal does not comply with clause 846A2, A2 or B123 of the scheme, as it proposes unscreened windows more than 1 metre above existing ground level, less than 4 metres from the rear boundary of my property. To provide me with a reasonable opportunity for privacy, the north-facing windows and the terrace at the first floor should be fixed with permanent screens to the height of 1.7 metres. I'm saddened that there was no consideration of the applicant's neighbours when designing this site. The proposal plan failed to address the impact on neighbours' quality of living without any consideration, consultation or just neighbourly courtesy to discuss. Tasmanian residential development legislation badly warrants additional guidelines to ensure sensitivity to site, consideration of the loss of amenities, disruption to lives and the long-term impact on the people whose properties are adjacent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming along today. Next I think it's Janice Wilson, is that correct?
Janice.
Lovely. Apologies. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Gibson, councillors. My name is Tanis Wilson. I recently came to live at 8 St George's Square and have experienced an especially kind and friendly neighbourhood. I would wish the owners well for the new house at 10 St George's Square. However, I do appeal to them to have consideration to their proposed views looking over their neighbours. I know their plans include garaging for 4 cars on the ground floor, which necessitates plans for their upstairs living, most of which directly looks over us. It is so sad that this comes at the cost of lack of privacy and light right inside our living areas and gardens. It makes a huge change to the feel and ultimately happiness of a home. And home is one's refuge. If there could be some sensitivity and consultation, it would be welcomed with open arms. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Next listed is Glenda King.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. The proposed new building is visually and physically obtrusive to the architectural and heritage values of the much lauded residential streetscape and park precinct of St George's Square and its adjoining streets. The new residence will regrettably inflict an unacceptable and significant loss of existing residential amenity, and you have heard from 3 residents who are most directly affected. Through its visual and actual bulk, through its siting on the block, and the resultant overshadowing and overlooking of adjoining residences. There are 7 adjoining residents in total, with 4 most directly affected. Despite amendments to the original abruptly withdrawn plans, resubmitted for today's meeting, there are still significant non-compliant items, as you have previously heard. So non-compliant that they were the basis of the recommendation for you to actually reject the original development plan. Now we find 2 weeks later you're being recommended to accept it. Why? The building has essentially the same scale, bulk and proportions. Its balconies and windows do not reduce or remove the intrusive overlooking of adjacent properties, who have no other options other than what they have for currently outdoor living. It will still block over 60% of health-giving winter sun and light at 12 St George's Square on its entire northern boundary over 2 floors. 60%. That is exceptionally significant. Number 4 Scott Street will also be affected. And there are no other options for the residents in these houses for their obtaining winter sun. The changes that would be imposed by this new residence on at least 4 adjoining properties and their owners are negative and long-term. They last as long as the new building stands if it is built, and they are life-changing. Directly affected neighbours will need to incur a financial cost to lessen the impact. Good design enhances lives. It does not degrade them.
Thanks,
Please
Glenda.
reject this application.
Thanks for joining us today. Are there any additional speakers with regard to 10.1? Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, members of our community who join us. Someone to move. Councillor Mackenzie, as recommended. Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Someone to second. Thank you, Councillor Britton. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I'd like to start by asking a couple of questions, if I could, please.
It's fine.
Just in relation to the fact that we did have this matter listed for discussion 2 weeks ago, and at that point in time it was listed for refusal, and today it's come back with some amendments and now listed for approval. I just wonder if the officer could just speak to the public and us in regards to what those changes that have been, what the changes have been made to now make this property compliant and therefore eligible to be recommended for approval, taking into account a number of the issues raised by the speakers, the screened balcony being 3 metres and not 4 metres away, unscreened windows, and the overlooking and overshadowing, if they could just contextualise those in their response.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Manager of City Development, Richard.
We might answer this question in 2 parts, noting it's quite a long question. I might answer the first bit about the process, and then I'll invite Mr. Payton to do the details. In assessment of this process and through the interactions with the councillors, we've made the point consistently that the planning department are trying to make sure that the development's as good as it can be. We reserve the right to speak to people and encourage people to improve their designs, particularly where it's facing a recommendation to refuse, as this one does. So once that was known, the applicant expressed a desire to continue to discuss that with us and offered to make some changes which substantially bring it back into compliance with the scheme. And in those circumstances, it's appropriate that we consider our advice to the council based on those revised plans. Now, those plans were quite significant. The changes were quite significant. They may be small in nature, but they were significant in impact on the scheme.
Thanks, Richard. Planner Duncan.
Yes, thank you. Yes, look, the original proposal breached the building envelope of the planning scheme in as much as in proximity to the southern side, which allowed us to look at the issue of the shadowing, the overshadowing onto the properties to the south, and to reach the conclusion that under those circumstances that was considered to be largely unacceptable. The modifications that the applicants did to their plans reduced the impact or the extent to which they breached that building envelope. Now, the building envelope is structured in a 3-dimensional plan, and the planning scheme allows up to 900 millimetres of protrusion through that for minor features such as eaves. So the redesign, although if you look at the plans and you look at the old plans and look at the new plans and you think, yeah, that's not a lot of change, but it was enough of a change that brought it back in so that it complied with the acceptable solution. which meant we were no longer able to assess any of those matters of intrusion on the blocks to the south. Because it met the acceptable solution, we didn't have the opportunity to consider the performance criteria. So when you look at it at the hard fact, where the impact on the property, shall we say at number 12, the reduction of that impact was only minor. We still didn't get the opportunity to look at that under the provisions of the scheme. Now, with regard to overlooking the properties on the north, there was further reduction again in the amount that the building protruded beyond the building envelope, and it came down to a point where effectively the only protrusion coming through that building envelope was the vertical screens projecting forward of the windows. So those screens were effectively put shadow over the windows themselves to shade those windows, not to screen overlooking of the adjoining property. But with regard to that, those windows are all set back 3 metres from the boundary. Now, this is the property's side boundary, and I think we need to understand that clearly. The property, the front boundary is clearly the boundary that faces St George's Square. The rear boundary is the boundary opposite that. The other two are side boundaries. The interpretation that Mrs Gatenby raised about it being 4 metres, it is within 4 metres of her rear boundary. So when we read the planning scheme, it says that the windows and decks have to be 4 metres from the rear boundary. Now, this is referring to the boundary of the subject property. We can't, otherwise we're going to have people doing zigzags down the side of their development. It's unrealistic to think that we can measure it as the rear boundary from the adjoining property. So it's 3 metres set back from the side boundary of its property. That's what we have to go by, and consequently those windows and the deck, even though they will clearly overlook the adjoining properties and they will clearly have an impact, we can't step away from that. We don't have an opportunity to require those windows to be screened or anything like that. So that's a matter of negotiation between with the applicant, and the applicants have considered that and decided not to.
Thanks, Planner Duncan. Any further questions, Councillor Mackenzie?
No.
Do you wish to, Councillor Dawkins, question?
Well, considering that response then, is it possible for us to condition that there's screening on the northern facing side of this DA?
Manager Richard. Planner Duncan.
Council has the opportunity to apply conditions to a permit, and we could put a condition on, but it is effectively invalid. We can't enforce it. So it would be a pointless exercise to do so, because those windows meet the acceptable solution. We don't have an opportunity to condition them to be better than that.
Thank you, Planner. Councillor Dawkins, any further questions at this point? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the item?
I do, thanks. And I do remind my fellow councillors that we are sitting as a planning authority, and therefore we're bound by the Act that runs the planning scheme here in Launceston. I've been to visit a number of the neighbours 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I understand the concerns, and they're very real and very understandable in relation to the matters we've spoken about and the matters that have been consideration in dealing with this. I understand the close-knit community of the St George's Square area and the change that anybody does when somebody builds something, and it's not the first house that we've had to deal with in that area in relation to matters of amenity and the overlooking and overshadowing issues, and we've had to work our way through this minefield more than once before. But again, I'm afraid I walk through these things. I have to read them the way that I read them. I take professional advice from the planning officers who provide it. They explained to us last time, and I wanted to go through the change from last time to now in a public sense so that everybody understood what had happened in that period of time. So what we've now found is that the building has been amended to make sure that it basically conforms with the confines of the building envelope. Yes, we've got overlooking, overshadowing issues, but as the officer has explained, it is a side setback, not a rear setback in relation to the fence, and therefore the actual building is actually in conformance with where those decks and balconies. I, like Mrs. Gatenby, would like to see some screening so that she didn't have her backyard, and I know how important that is to her, having visited her, and her amenity and her ability to get out and about is challenged. So therefore this is an extremely important part of her backyard. And whilst I understand the answer from the officer in relation to the screening, I'd like the proponent to take on board the needs of their neighbour in relation to their privacy, which might flow back in the other way as well, in them not having to look over the fence. But I really look at this and I say, well, this has been planned. It may well have been planned right to the edge of the boundaries of all the acceptable solutions to have something that's built here. But unfortunately, it substantially meets the planning scheme, and therefore I don't think we've got any option but to approve this today. I note there was one other submission that was, I guess, substantive, which is on the boundary of, I think, 10 and 12, where there's a wall to be removed. And I note the commentary in relation to that. That is actually not a planning scheme issue. That is going to be a building issue. So I'm hopeful that the building permit will take into consideration the amenity of the property next door on the southern side to ensure that their amenity is not impacted during the building environment. And I know that's something that can be conditioned. And also I would put forward to that lady that potentially she should get a dilapidation report in relation to her own building to ensure that if there's any building issues that have been taken, that occur, or any issues that come as a result of the building on her walls or whatever, given us so close, that she's then got something to go back and deal with. But unfortunately, it's not something we can put on the proponent. That can only be the owner of that property that can go out and seek such a dilapidation report, but I'd certainly put that as a sensible thing for her to do. On the strength of that, I don't think there's much more that I can say. I appreciate the comments made by all the speakers today. I understand that what I'm saying will not satisfy you, but I have to stand here as a member of a planning authority and make decisions based on that, and I don't really believe we have much wriggle room in relation to what is actually being proposed today.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Britton. No. Happy at this point. Any other? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And just like Councillor Mackenzie, I share Mrs. Gatenby's frustration as well. If that was my property, I would be speaking on this as strongly as all the speakers today. Trying to get my head around the planning scheme and seeing if there's any wriggle room. There simply really is none. But I love what Councillor Dawkins said, could we apply conditions? And I know the response was that basically there's no point. But I would like for us as a council to do what we can, do whatever we can to put forward a really strong case to the owners of 10 St George's Square that, I myself share the concerns of all the other residents, and surely they'd like to speak with their neighbours and consider anything they can do for, the quality of getting on with your neighbour simply, So I would strongly recommend that we apply some conditions, and yeah, it's frustrating to stand here today and not really be able to do anything to help you because our hands are pretty much tied. So, yeah, if we can in any way apply some sort of conditions, I'd like to be guided by my fellow councillors and you, Mayor, on what we can do in that regard. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. CEO, the advice with regard to applying non-defendable conditions to today's permit.
Certainly, in terms of professional advice, it's not something that we can support. If it's not supportable under law, again, it's more the town planning advice that we would need to seek on that. But it's not something that we would recommend.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Duncan and Richard, for your expertise in an area that is dividing of council hat and planning authority hat. I would like to speak to what Councillor Palmer and Councillor Dawkins said, that if we are to say that conditions are pointless, that this council sees the point of putting conditions in, that we are not 100% happy with the planning scheme and the conditions that it necessarily puts onto the people in our community, and that if we are to put conditions, whether they are acted on or not, it puts this council in the position of saying that we are still standing with what we need to do as a planning authority, but we are conditionally positioning it that we are still going to stand for our community. And I would like to see some weight in how that goes forward into the state planning scheme that we are in a way dictated to by, to say that we are local council, we are living in our community, and that not every condition of this scheme, whilst it legally fits, is fitting with our view as community members. So I unfortunately will be supporting this in the way that it is my duty as planning authority, but as a community member, I do apologise for my view on where this sits for the community up in St George's Square.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A question, Councillor Dawkins.
For many people that we meet in this room for the first time, it's the first interaction with them and the planning authority. Are you able to explain that if we were to vote against this today, what the likely next steps would be for council?
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Manager of City Development, Richard, are you able to succinctly respond to that question?
Well, it's quite hard to hypothesise. If it was to be refused today, there's a likelihood that an appeal would be lodged. I think in that case, we would have a relatively modest or thin grounds to argue council's decision, which, if we were to speculate, would probably lead to council's decision being overturned and may well expose us to costs. The reason being is that we knew and we did it, and that is not normally looked favourably on.
Thanks, Manager. Councillor Dr. Raze.
We seem to be all agreeing that the well-being of the neighbours is so important, and yet we feel hopeless about what can we do about it. And then if we look at governments from federal to state to local government, they all talk about well-being of the community. Launceston especially is a community city where neighbourhoods still very connected, and we have got that sense of we are all together in it. It's important we have to do something in the future. We might not be able to help you now, but I think this is a question for the future. How the well-being of the neighbourhood is so important in our planning scheme, and we have to find a way in the future how we can help in helping our even planning authority here, how we can apply that in future development.
Thanks, Dr. Raze. Councillor McMahon.
As Mrs Gatenby stated, perhaps it would be nice if the planning scheme did have a provision or a sensitivity towards loss of amenity. Unfortunately, we're not able to take that into consideration as a planning authority and working within the current scheme. I also hope that the proponent will consider screening as a show of good faith.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Kai.
Well, understandably, I need to support the approval of this DA presented to us today, as it meets the requirements for our planning scheme. This is where the problem is with our planning scheme, as it does not protect the existing residents from being severely impacted, such as the unreasonable overshadowing and the overlooking into Mrs Gates' private open space. Sometimes, I know the developers are not here, but if they are here to listen, I would just like to say that sometimes, just because we could do something to a certain extent, it doesn't mean that we should, but it's choices that we make and actions that defines our relationships with the people that live closest to us. And I believe that, all communities can live in harmony, and it would be nice for anyone in that community to, step foot outside their house and see their neighbours smile and wave, have a chat, rather than, having to turn away all upset and having this wonderful dream of this big development or nice development turning into a nightmare. Now, I do encourage the developers, who's not here at the moment, but to talk with their neighbours and hear their concerns. So it's pretty much, it could be, you know, just simple things like putting up the screen or keeping that wall that Tammy wanted to keep, and just small deeds like that. Little small considerations can go a long way. So I would like to say that I will support approving this DA as it satisfies the acceptable solution, but we cannot deny that this will unreasonably impact the surrounding neighbours. So, like everyone else said, if conditions are possible, or if we can look into later on changing the planning scheme in a way where we can impose conditions, I reckon that would probably be the best outcome.
Thanks, Councillor Kai. Question, Councillor McKenzie.
Just point at the CEO who's walked out because it might relate to him. I've been doing this for 11 or so years now as a planning authority, and I get concerned every time we end up in a situation like we've ended up today. And given the proponent isn't here, they may be listening online, is there a situation where, whilst we might approve this today, send a very strong message back from this table that we would really like them to have further conversations with their neighbours, and also to take on board screening, even though it's not legally something we can enforce? Is that something that's out of order, planning officers?
Manager of City Development, Richard.
There's certainly the opportunity for council to include a note on the permit, and if it was to express in a note that it, in whatever form it desired really, or communicated its view that it encourages the applicant to consider screening or further discussions with the neighbours, I think that would be okay. There's no statutory weight behind a note, but it does allow the opportunity to convey those things.
Thank you, Manager. Councillor Palmer, question?
Question, thank you, Mayor. If we do apply that note, is there the possibility that it comes back to the table again before any vote or approval? No.
No, that's not something that would be possible. Manager Richard, could you just reaffirm that, please?
If it was the council's desire to include a note on the permit, I would imagine we could put some words together in a relatively short time for that to be considered, if that was the desire.
No, sorry, Councillor Palmer was saying the outcome of the note.
Oh, the outcome would be advisory only. There would be no binding or statutory effect to the note, but it would allow council to communicate its view.
Thank you. So whilst the meeting is continuing, I would ask, please, planning officers to start preparing that note in the assumption that someone will be requesting it formally as we continue. Councillor Walker. A question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I hadn't put my hand up yet, but thanks for the prompt. And now the planning officer walks out. The question was to that planning officer.
Question to me, and I'll triage it for you.
Was to the officer by you. Thank you, Mayor. My first question is, this is under the new planning scheme. There are provisions in the new planning scheme that make sure that a new development provides a certain area of privacy for that development. What are the specifics of that provision?
Thanks.
I understand that this development meets that provision, so I'm just interested in fleshing that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Manager Richard.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. Are you want me to read out the provision in the scheme dealing with privacy?
Yeah, the provision that relates to this development, providing private open space for itself.
Oh, for itself. Okay. I don't have that in my head. I'll just refer to the report.
It's fine. Thank you.
It's under 8.28. I can read it out if you like. Thank you, Mayor. 8.4.3.
Well, Councillor Walker, yes, if you'd like to read that out.
I will read it out and reframe the question.
Thank you,
yeah.
Thanks.
The proposed development, the dwelling has a private open space in excess of 24 square metres at the rear of the site. A dwelling must have private open space that is either one of 24 square metres or 12 square metres if the dwelling is a multiple dwelling with a finished floor level that is entirely more than 1.8 metres above the finished ground level. Does this property provide that? Yes, it does. My question then, thank you, Mayor, through you, is how can a planning scheme insist that it creates a private open space for itself, yet deny that for the very building that is adjacent to it?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Manager Richard.
I think the context of the word private is important. Private as in belonging and for the use of, not private, nobody can see into it.
But if that space was at the front of the building, it would not be considered a private space because of the front road.
I believe private open space can be at the front of the building. I don't believe it's for the exclusive use of rather than cannot be seen into.
More questions, if I may. Thank you, Mayor.
Of course. Councillor Walker.
Can I get some understanding of what consultation has happened with the neighbours? We might not be privy to what the developer has had with neighbours, but there surely must have been some mediation that council oversaw when representations were presented between neighbours and the developer?
Manager Richard.
The application was advertised. We got representations, and on the back of that, Planning Officer Payton contacted those and had a number of conversations about those. I don't know the details, and we might be able to ask Duncan when he returns.
No mediation then between the parties?
In mediation...
Sorry, so the question is around the requirement of mediation, I think, with regard to this development application.
Well, simply there is no formal mediation process. There is one allowed for in the Act, but it's very rarely invoked. If you're saying, was there discussions between the planning officer and the representatives, the answer to that was yes. Was it a formal mediation process? No.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you. We have recently, as a council, moved from our own provisional planning scheme to a statewide planning scheme. What provisions are there for amenity, especially privacy? I know that Councillor McMahon just mentioned that there is none, essentially. There is some provision for that amenity, sure.
Yes, there is. And if you look at the scheme, there are standards, but the scheme it balances the ability to develop a property and the amenity for neighbours. It sets the figure, particularly for overlooking on a side boundary, to be 3 metres. Now, if you look across Launceston, there are a lot of double-storey houses within 3 metres of boundaries. In fact, it's not uncommon. The circumstances of this are it's a double-storey house looking onto a neighbour's backyard, but ultimately the 3 metre boundaries seem to be acceptable. It balances the need to allow development and people to build houses on their block. If it was further than that, the blocks are only 10, 12 metres. You would start to compromise the ability to build houses. So there has to be a point where there is a envelope drawn, and for this point, it's 3 metres.
But it's also the case that that is the side boundary where this property does exceed the the standard acceptable envelope. Is that correct? This is where it's one place where it exceeds.
No, as Duncan said, the plans, the revised plans suggest that there are minimal incursions the windows are entirely within the 3 metres and entirely within the building.
I suppose the point I'm trying to get is that the windows may be within, but the protrusion beyond the acceptable envelope means that the windows then are able to be closer to the protrusion of the roof, if you like.
No, if you refer you to the plans, you'll see that the protrusions through have no impact at all on the overlooking. They are very, very minor architectural details.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm suggesting.
Thanks, Manager.
Okay.
Are there any further questions from the table?
I'd like to speak.
Councillor Kai.
Could we mediate between the representatives and the developers to a way where it might resolve an appeal or prevent an appeal?
CEO.
As I said, as the manager of planning sort of said, it's fraught with problems. The mediation, in that you can't compel parties to engage within that. So, in answer to your question, in terms of this particular case, there would be no opportunity to be able to mediate that. If there's an appeal, there's a mediation process that occurs through the TASCAT process, but certainly it's not typical of councils to engage in mediation as part of the process.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Kai, any further questions at this point? Councillor Walker, wishing to speak.
Well, I would like to just question again that word private. I mean, private is used in many parts of this scheme, and I think commonly we would understand private to mean that that someone's space is protected from intrusion, you know, whether it be visual or physical. But I just wonder if the officer can further elaborate on that, because it's difficult if a word like private is used that doesn't actually mean private.
So we'll answer the question
Yep.
at the end. You're currently speaking.
Am I? Okay. Oh, I'm currently speaking. I thought I was asking one more question. Okay, I'm currently speaking. We do need to send a message to the state government. Without doubt, this has happened many times since I've been on council. And it's fine to sort of say, well, I'm here sitting as a planning authority, I must follow the planning rules. And that is true, and I accept that entirely. I also accept that the planning scheme is a living thing. It does live and breathe and change, and it is open, as we have learnt many times, to interpretation. And that is what is important. What is difficult in this current scheme is that there's a word such as private, which you cannot interpret as meaning private. Creating a private space, I'm told, I'm informed, means it can be something that's open for all to see. That's private. It's a new definition of the word. Thank you, Mayor. Of course, everyone likes to get on with their neighbours. And I would like to think that there will be an effort that is made here for that to occur. I understand that a developer may have needs that they need to fulfil, but here we have, like in many parts of Launceston, people who all know each other in a small area, people who greet each other daily, and that type of thing. And it would be a terrible shame if that type of feeling is soured by someone who thinks that they can impose things, you know, within a cat's whisker of the development of the planning scheme, and think that that's acceptable for the local neighbourhood. It's affecting people on both sides, as we know. And certainly what I hear from my fellow councillors is they would like to send a message to the developer. We've heard that loud and clear. And maybe I could pause there if we could get some feedback on that. If you'd be happy to do that, Chair, as our planner has walked back in. But otherwise I'm happy to finish and say that there should be further discussion with neighbours. You know, what shape that takes, you know, I would like to think that that's initiated by a developer when they come forward with an idea, to have those conversations. There should be more discussion from this council about what private means in our new planning scheme. because it certainly, at the moment, doesn't mean that we are protecting what normally people would assume is their privacy, i.e. someone not able to, view their backyard, which is what is going to happen here. There is less protection of people's amenity under this scheme, and if we have to find a way to convey that, and we have to find a way to make provisions within our planning scheme, then I think we should make haste and begin that work as a council, because these will keep coming back again and again, and there's no point saying that this is written in stone and we cannot change the planning scheme. We're being given clear instruction from our community that they are not happy with this intrusion into their lives. We need to find a way to send that message forward. At the moment, the only way to send that message is to refuse the application, is to fight it in a tribunal. I'm not even sure on what grounds we could fight it at the moment. It would be very flimsy indeed. So that makes it very difficult. But I'm been elected to represent my community, and I will do that. And I won't do it with any hesitation. I won't do it and step back from a clear message that I've heard time and time again, which is that people would like their amenity respected when it comes to development. It was eminently possible here. It could have been done. It's not being done. I'd like to see a way forward. I'd like to see the provision of that screening put in place as a minimum, but in the more long-term picture, I would like to see that this doesn't even occur. That in such a challenge block with a single-storey dwelling, it should stay a single-storey dwelling. That would have solved all of those problems. But instead, we're in a position where now this will happen time and time again in this town, and we will continue to hear this same argument in this room over and over again.
Thanks,
It
Councillor.
has to be short-circuited. Thank you, Mayor.
I was going to say, do you require extension? But I think you are done. So we had asked, I've got a couple of questions. We'd asked the planning officers to prepare wording that could be used as an amendment for a note. I'm going to ask the CEO to read the words that have been prepared that could be used by a councillor in the form of a note. So, Manager of City Development, Richard, if you could read those out.
So also, if I just refer to the definitions in the planning scheme, these are at clause 3.1, planning terms and definitions. And if you go down the list to private open space, the definition is means an outdoor area of land or dwelling for the exclusive use of occupants of the land or dwelling, excluding areas proposed or approved for vehicle access or vehicle parking. It is purely for the exclusive use of, and that's the sense of the word private. So that's.
Thanks, Richard. CEO, could you read, please? While you tidy it up, I might just say, so what I'll be seeking, if indeed it's the will of councillors to move an amendment, that either Councillor Dawkins or Councillor Britton, neither of whom has spoken, would move an amendment that will then be considered by the table with regard to the inclusion of the note. Question before, Councillor Mackenzie.
Just on note, and there's a fair bit of angst, I think, from everybody who's spoken around the table on this matter. I note that this doesn't seek deemed approval till the 24th of March, which would kick this down the road, if we kicked it down the road for another 2 weeks, for an opportunity to go back and I guess express the concerns expressed by this table to the proponent before we voted on it. We still would be able to do it in the next council meeting as opposed to that. Is that an option that we could utilise?
CEO, the option, as Councillor Mackenzie has spoken of.
Clearly, it's an option for the council to do that if it chooses to, but the professional advice will stay the same. The advice that we provided in respect of mediation and the legality of being able to require the screening doesn't change, and so the set of circumstances that you're provided with today will be exactly the same in terms of the professional advice.
I understand that. I hope is that what might come out is the fact that we've all spoken the way we've spoken, and that's relayed back to the proponent, and they may seek to change their view.
I'll take that as a comment. CEO, would you please read the draft words of a note that could be applied?
So just listening to the discussion around the table, so it would be, so a note headed impact upon adjoining properties in recognition of the impact upon the amenity of the adjoining residents through overshadowing and overlooking of private open space. Council strongly urges the proponent to consider options such as the provision of suitable screening to reduce this impact.
So those draft words have been read out by the CEO. Councillor Dawkins?
Yes.
You wish to move an amendment?
I'll move that amendment as read by the CEO. I think it's all we can do here today. What we're arguing about when we make this amendment is we're trying to push back to the proponent and say, we've listened to community, as everyone around this table has expressed their deep concern and wish to do so. But also, in some way, we go to being able to ensure that that privacy is still continues for the people who are affected on that northern side. But really, what we're talking about here today is that blocks are getting smaller and builds are getting bigger.
We're just going to speak about the amendment, if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. You'll have your opportunity to speak more wholesomely in a moment. Councillor Britton, on the amendment? No. Does any... I'm seeking a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Walker, thank you. You'll second the amendment. The amendment will come up on the screen in a moment. Councillor Walker, would you like to speak to the addition of those words in the note?
Yeah, if I could just wait till the words appear,
Sure.
Thank you.
No worries. So procedurally what will happen is we will consider the amendment, we'll take a vote on the amendment. The amendment will either be approved or not and become part of the substantive motion. Okay. Just take a moment. The screen will come up in a moment once it's saved into the system. Okay, so G, the amendment would be the addition of G, impact upon adjoining properties, in recognising the impact upon the amenity of the adjoining residents through overshadowing of private open space. Council strongly urges the proponent to consider options such as the provision of suitable screening to reduce this impact. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll make it clear under the new planning scheme that there is very little protection for people's amenity. There is very little that we can do. It's made clear that this amendment is not a binding one. It's council expressing their wishes to see some resolution to this situation, and you could well ask then, well, who are the adjoining residents and what's the, what's considered their private open space and that type of thing. Hopefully, with a little goodwill, that will be understood. And that strong urging of the proponent to consider options in regards to that will probably augur extremely well for the good natured relationships in that particular part of Launceston. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. A question on the amendment, Councillor Britton.
So it's not. I don't know if it's about the amendment or not, but I actually liked what Councillor Mackenzie said. Would we have to put it in the amendment to hold it off for another 2 weeks, or would we have to do it after?
So this would become part of what we're considering today. Councillor Britton, I guess, is asking what other options are available in terms of enacting that. Is that what you're asking?
Can I speak to that quickly?
No, not yet. Councillor Palmer, a question on the amendment. Does anyone wish to speak further with regard to the amendment? Deputy Mayor.
Just quickly going on the amendment and saying that this isn't necessarily just a position that this council is taking on this developer, but it is a position that this council is taking on the overall planning scheme. So that's what a lot of discussion has been around the amendment, and I feel heavily that this is what this council is setting that position as, whether it be viewed as pointless, whether it be viewed as something that can be legislated. We know that where it falls, but this is the position that we're taking today.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. So, Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to close before? No, you don't. So I'd just like to clearly articulate what we're doing. We're currently voting on the determination whether or not we add G, those 2 lines that are referred to on the board in letter G, to become part of this permit consideration. It's moved. Councillor Dawkins, seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour of the amendment raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The vote is 10-0. That amendment now becomes the substantive motion, and we now refer to the speakers remaining. Councillors Dawkins and Britton, you have the opportunity to speak to the motion. Councillor Dawkins.
Just briefly, because this has been a free-ranging discussion around the nature of the planning scheme itself rather than this particular development application. But as I was beginning to say, there is absolutely no doubt that the blocks are getting smaller and the developments are getting bigger. It's a trend that's not only in Launceston, in this LGA, but around the state and indeed around the country and the developed world. Whilst we're trying to reduce urban sprawl and bring infill development in order to bring more amenity to the entire community, there is no doubt that individuals within those communities are feeling a negative effect. I am bound to support this development today. As we have discussed, we have very little power here. All we can do is note and ask in this amendment. We cannot compel. This is a part of the issue with the planning scheme as it sits, but something that we need to lobby state government in order to change, or the Planning Commission through local planning provisions. So thank you for your discussion today. I think the community has seen that we are earnest when we listen and we wish to make an impact for them, but we are constrained by the very nature of planning law.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Britton.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's pretty clear to everyone in the room that no one really wants to vote yes, but we are bound to do so. And if anyone would like a reasoning why after today, I'm happy to give you one, and I'm sure anyone else in the room is as well. Councillor Mackenzie brought something up that we might be able to delay this by a couple of weeks. I think if we made this amendment, we have the power to delay it for 2 weeks, and we do that, and it comes back with screening in the actual plans, that'll be a win for the whole council and everyone else involved. And if that's the only thing that we have in our power left, I think we should try and do that. I don't know how we do that or what happens, but it would appear to me that everyone in the room wants to do absolutely as much as we can, and if there is one more thing we can do, I know it's against all professional recommendation, but I'd like to see if we can.
Thanks, Councillor Britton. CEO, the question is the ability to lay the item on the table, but importantly, the devices that could be asked of officers to engage in further conversations with regard to the screening and particularly the note that has been applied or would be applied.
Thanks, Mayor. So the recommendation and the professional advice has been provided, and a recommendation for approval is before you. I can't ask an officer to go and take an action that is contrary to that, which is to request and seek screening, because we know that their view is that it's not required to achieve compliance with the scheme. So were it to be left on the table to have discussions with them around the applicant around screening, that's all they would be, is discussions, because there's no compunction for them to do it. So again, the application of the notice on the permit, if it was to be approved, provides the direction in terms of the council's the issue. But again, it's really it's something for the council to determine, and certainly you have the power to defer it a fortnight if you choose. But all I can say is that from an officer point of view is that you'll be presented with the same set of facts with the same application in a fortnight's time. So.
Another question, Councillor Britton.
Not a question.
You can frame it as a question.
Would it be a good idea to do that?
I think the professional advice has been such that you will need to consider that yourself. What I'm hearing is that potentially a councillor is seeking to move a motion to lay the item on the table. Perhaps.
I'd like to move a motion to lay it on the table.
It's moved, Councillor Britton, that the item at 10.1 lay on the table for the purposes of, we'll need to provide some...
For the purposes that are that the developer might have a look at the amendments we've made and potentially change their planning out of the goodwill of their heart by the next meeting.
So some words are being typed onto a screen. It's a shame it's not the other screen, but we'll see how we go. Councillor Walker, are you seeking to second that motion, which is currently being worded? Thank you. So it's moved that the motion lay on the table in order to engage in discussions with the developer. Additional professional advice is just give me a second. Okay, so that is the motion that Councillor Britton has moved, that the motion lay on the table in order to engage in discussions with the developer. It's seconded by Councillor Walker. CEO, notwithstanding the professional advice that you've already provided with regard to the validity of this particular motion, is there anything further you can provide us with?
Well, you're not making a decision on the permit today. That doesn't, obviously the deemed approval is still outside, is after the next council meeting, is it not?
Correct.
So, I mean, so you're deferring it, so lawfully you can do what you're doing,
The words lay on the table, does that suggest that the item comes back to us and we pick it up from where it went? And would that differ if the word deferral was used? Duncan, are you able to assist us with that? Traditionally, lay it on the table has meant that we come back and pick up from where we've taken off. Louise?
Basically picking up on the same.
So the motion is that the motion lay on the table until the next council meeting to be held on the 23rd of March in order to engage with discussions with the developer. That's a procedural motion. So that will mean there was no speaking on the procedural motion. However, there's a question about the motion and the validity of it from Councillor Mackenzie.
This is just adding a slight complication to the matter as being the original mover of the motion. I will not be at the next meeting. Does that matter?
We'll deal with that then. A procedural question from Councillor Kai.
So within these 2 weeks, before it comes back to the table in 2 weeks' time, will someone actively be going out to talk to the developers, or are we just leaving it on the table and just...
CEO, the intention versus the action.
So we've listened to the council, so there'll be a conversation that will be had with the applicant to explain the discussion and the debate that's occurred today. But that will be the extent of it. It will be to explain the council's view of the matter.
So will our concerns around the table be brought to the developers and explained?
I think that's what the CEO just said.
Indeed,
if there's any additional changes that the developer wishes to put forward after that's conveyed, then that would then come as an alternate recommendation subsequent to what has been presented as professional advice today. Are there any other administrative questions? Councillor Walker.
Is it the case that if the developer was contacted before the end of this meeting, that this item could proceed today if they were to agree with that request that was earlier inserted as an amendment to the development application?
Noting that is not what the motion before us asks of us at this point. Are there any other questions with regard administratively to this motion before us? Okay, it's my intent to put this motion that we lay the item on the table until the next council meeting to be held on the 23rd of March in order to engage in discussions with the applicant to the table. After we consider this, there'll be no further conversation with regard to the item. All those in favour of the motion raise their hand. Deputy Mayor, all councillors except the Mayor. That motion is carried 9-1 and will lay on the table until the next council meeting. That brings us to 10.2. Amendment rezoning of land at 9 Rose Lane, South Launceston, as listed. I have no speakers listed. Are there any speakers from the floor? Someone to move 10.2. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, as recommended. Councillor Mackenzie. A seconder? Councillor Dawkins, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I'd like to ask a question before I do speak. Just on note on page 33 of our papers, under summary of representation, saying that there were no representations, it says, notwithstanding the council was made aware of several omissions to the original application which relate to incorrect endorsed documents, title consolidation and advertised plans. These changes have been incorporated in the permit through the flowing changes. My question is that because those things have now come to light, does that impact on the advertising period that we've done and the fact that it's got omissions in it and therefore becomes something we have to re-advertise? I just want to double check that this is still all in order.
Senior Town Planner, Ian.
The short answer is no. This is a combined scheme amendment, so it's a slightly different process. With respect to if representations, for example, were received, the council has the ability to amend the permit or amend their recommendations, because this is ultimately going to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, who will make that final assessment and decision.
Further question?
No, I will now speak. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't causing ourselves some angst with that particular issue. Look, this has come to us previously for us to put it out for public comment. It's been through the mandatory period of time for the public to make comment. no comments have been received, and therefore I'm happy to vote to endorse the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Dawkins. No comment at this stage. Any councillor wish to make a contribution to 10.2? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 10-0. 10.3, I have no speakers listed for amendments, substantial modifications, Relbia rezoning land from agricultural to rural. Someone to move? Councillor Mackenzie. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Mackenzie.
Again, I'd like to start with two questions, if I may, before I speak. I note this has come to us today, but just to ensure there's no confusion as to the reasons why this amendment's been put to us today, firstly. And secondly, given that we did a significant body of work in regards to the Relbia plan and amendments to zoning and I think lot sizes and things like that through that Relbia plan, that the impact of what we're deciding today has no impact on, what's the word I'm looking for? Is actually broadly in line with the original sort of direction of that Relbia plan.
Yeah, just with the first question, so the next three items you'll have are what are called substantial modifications to the planning scheme through a planning scheme amendment. These were directions issued to us by the Tasmanian Planning Commission as part of the local provisions schedule and the implementation of that. Generally, what it meant was during the hearing process, there was identified parcels of land, in this instance, going from agricultural to rural, where it was agreed we agreed to that zoning. It was a substantial modification in that not because of that rezoning, other smaller pieces of land also had to be rezoned around it, just to ensure that the pattern of zoning and development within that area is continuous. So that's the reason why these are here today. Now, they didn't originally come to a previous meeting as they were directions from the Commission. However, these under a Section 40K report are required to be endorsed by Council. Now, sorry, just remind me of, the second, the Relbia work. These will be consistent with the Relbia work that's been undertaken.
Councillor Mackenzie.
I speak now just to speak in favour of the endorsement.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins is the seconder. Any contributions? 10.3. Councillor Raze, question?
Perhaps I will say something before my question.
Sure.
Now, Relbia population, in 2016 it was 672. So there has been like a big increase since the 90 of that. Relbia also is a home of vineyard, winery, distilleries, even accommodation, visitor accommodation as well. Relbia Road from the vicinity is 20 meters wide, and it hasn't got like a proper, only small section where it has got a proper pavement. Now, there has been recent increase in the number of walkers and cyclists along Relbia Road, and there is major concern of the local community about their safety. People often walk along the side of the road because there is no other safe place for them to walk. Now, my main question, as well as future growth, as well as we are expecting the change in zoning, would there be consideration of putting tracks for cyclists and walkers, mainly for safety for the local residents and also visitors?
Councillor Dr. Raze, whilst not particularly relevant to this question, could we take that on notice and have that provided subsequent to this consideration as a member of a planning authority? Anthea, you're happy with that? Recreational offerings, Relbia, thank you. Councillor Dawkins? No, I think I asked you that. Does any councillor wish to speak to 10.3? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 10-0. We now move to page 40 of the agenda, 10.4, Amendment, substantial modifications, East Tamar Highway, rezoning land from agricultural to rural and application of the priority vegetation overlay. There are no speakers listed, no speakers in the room wishing to speak to 10.4. Someone to move. Councillor Dawkins, seconder. Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Dawkins.
As noted, this is another procedural motion that we are bringing in line with the local provisions under the new planning scheme. What's noted in this is that there is an application of the priority vegetation overlay, and I have a question about why it would be applied to this and not to the previous amendment.
Thank you. A question, Ian.
Not a problem. So under the agricultural zone, the priority vegetation overlay is not applied. So when it changes from that to the rural zone, it is applied, among other zones. Now this one, there is a priority vegetation layer that we were provided and that went through the local provision schedule. On this property, it exists. On the previous at Relbia Road, it does not. So that's why there was no further overlay provided.
Councillor Mackenzie as the seconder. Does any councillor wish to speak to 10.4? Councillor Dawkins, anything further? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is carried. All councillors present 10-0. 10.5, amendment, substantial modifications, local heritage precinct data sheet, revised local heritage precinct data sheet. There are no speakers listed. Moved, Councillor Walker. A seconder, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Walker.
To take something out of Councillor Mackenzie's book, I'll start with a question, if I may. And I note that this is an ongoing long-term process that Council is engaged in, and this will be the first of quite a few amendments to insert a heritage precinct into our into our planning scheme. But I note on the map here, for example, a contemporary hardware store is included within the boundaries of this precinct. Can you just explain the rationale behind that, please?
So the precinct, we engaged with our heritage officer as well as heritage consultants to, I guess, have a look at areas where precincts would be relevant. Obviously, this will be the first of many for the future. And I guess when looking at a precinct, it's different to when just sort of assessing an application against either heritage provisions or through the Heritage Council on its own merits within just what effect it has on the value of that property. A precinct actually looks at the entirety of the precinct as a whole. And I guess when you start looking at the Bex or the Mitre 10 site, whilst now that's right, it might not change in the future. It's to ensure that, if something were to happen on that site in the future, that it will still be consistent with the cultural values of the area.
Thank you. I'll speak to the item. Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for that explanation. And I hope that the councillors and our community understand that these precincts will provide a level of protection across an area, and that's quite significant. We've had many examples in the past where, whilst a heritage property or the fabric of that property hasn't been in danger, certainly developments right near it, next to it, have caused concern. This allows for Launceston to be appropriately proud of these precincts as they're adopted into our planning scheme. And I would certainly encourage residents to take an interest in that process as it continues. As far as councillors go, it shows how we are able to have an impact on the planning scheme. We are able to insert into our planning scheme certain provisions, not necessarily for entire cities or entire suburbs, but for certain areas to give them special recognition for whatever that may be, in this case, their heritage value. So I do congratulate the work that has been done to get us to this stage. It has been a considerable amount of work and a considerable amount of time that it has taken to get to this point. Well may it continue with all haste and speed, because we know that we have properties in Launceston that most people would consider should have heritage protection that do not have that at the moment. That may have been no one's particular fault, but that's what has occurred through changes legislatively on a state level and through changes to the planning scheme. And so this will go partway to address that, and I do commend it to the table. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mackenzie is the seconder.
Yes, please. I remember when this started, and it was a number of years ago, so I'm pretty excited that this has actually happened today. And I know the delays have really been around the fact that we were coming into the statewide planning scheme, which is delayed. But I'd really just to acknowledge Fiona Ransom, our heritage officer, heritage planning officer, who's been greatly involved in getting this done. And this is one of a series of precincts that we'll be introducing into the city, which will actually, I think, afford that heritage city protection that we have been so much looking forward to, Councillor Walker, in our years involved with the Heritage Advisory Group. So I'm excited this has happened today. I look forward to seeing the rollout of other precincts in due course.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Any other contributions? Councillor Walker, anything else for you to say? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present, 11-0, noting Councillor Pentridge's return at 2:43. 10.6, 30 Oxford Street, East Launceston, construction of alterations and additions to a dwelling. The first speaker listed is Susie Simon Crawford. Welcome, Susie. Just head to the microphone.
Thank you very much, Mayor and councillors. Having sat here and listened to the previous comments about amenities in our area, a lot of this has been covered off on. So I'm just coming with a heartfelt plea, to put it that way. Yes, and my name is Susie Simon Crawford, and I live at number 6 Tasman Street in East Launceston. I've actually lived there since about 1962. On and off. 30 Oxford Street is at the rear of our property. Now, we are the most affected residents, or we are the most affected residents by this development. I've come here today to verbally voice some of my, or our main concerns about the development application plan for 30 Oxford Street. The personal effect it has on our way of life and privacy. The length of this building covers the full width of our block. And the massive height, even if there is a 30mm difference, I did read, I think, that there could be an adjustment of 30mm, the reduction still towers over it. The building design is out of context with surrounding houses. Now, we currently enjoy a view to the north, but if this building goes ahead, that view will be blocked completely. The extension will cast extensive shade over our garden. Our trees are deciduous and rely on the sun to nourish our vegetable garden. This shade will also delay the time it takes for the winter frost to melt in our garden. We now have sun on the rear of our garden. If the development goes ahead, it will severely limit the amount of morning sun we'll get. So it will have a considerable impact on our way of life. The view and the sun are part of the reason why we live where we live, and the decision you make today will affect that.
Thank you, Susie. We appreciate you coming along today. Next listed is Lyndon Stubbs.
Thanks, Mayor. Lyndon Stubbs from Design to Live on Wellington Street. Further to the information in the planning report, I'd just like to add a couple of points about the design. In relation to the scale and bulk, the additional upper floor of the dwelling, or sorry, of the extension, only add 1.4 metres of overall height to the building. So when viewed from the front, the building actually only becomes 1.4 metres higher to nestle in behind the existing roof line. So that's the design of the upper floor, and the basement level extension is cut into the ground and works with the 1.8 metre fall over the additional building footprint. And as per the planner's report, the adjoining properties are elevated higher than the proposal, which will minimise any impact of the scale and bulk when viewed from surrounding properties. In terms of the overshadowing, the average backyard size of the adjoining properties is 290 square metres, which is substantially greater than the 24 metres squared of private open space as required for all dwellings in Part 8.4.3 of the planning scheme. The winter sun studies provided show there's only an additional 8 metres squared of shadow cast on the neighbouring backyards. That's, from memory, that was at 10 a.m. on the winter solstice. So additional 8 metres squared of shadow cast by the development compared to what an allowable building envelope would cast. So it's only a really small addition to what an allowable building would cast. And again, the surrounding vegetation would also provide some shadowing on the backyard, so we're actually not furthering any additional shading than what's there now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lyndon. We appreciate you being with us also. Someone to move item 10.6. Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. A seconder? Councillor Kai, thank you. Councillor Dawkins has a question.
My question is about how a view is defined in the planning scheme and what protections are there for view.
Manager Richard, with regard to view in the scheme.
The scheme doesn't specifically refer to views as of the neighbour's view over private property towards the distance. It relates to visual bulk, which has some correlation with loss of view, but it's not the same concept. So the fact that you may lose a distant view on the horizon is not a relevant factor. The fact that you may see something from your house may be relevant, depending on its scale and size and the impact it has on the view. And those things are relative to how it appears, the vegetation, the distance, the height differences, and the context by which you see a building from the neighbour. The view itself isn't relevant.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Mackenzie as the mover.
Thanks, Mayor. And again, thank you for the speaker and her comments, and very heartfelt, and I understand the concept of anything that changes next door to you has an impact on what you're used to. Again, reading through the planning documents, there is very little, if any, requirement for any discretions in here in the planning scheme. I think it's also important to note that this is a property that slopes quite severely from the front to the back, and therefore the fact that it's a 3-storey build is somewhat lessened by the fact of the sloping backyard. I think the comments made by the designer, the fact that they built the basement floor or the bottom floor into the ground, which is basically at the level of the ground floor of the residence in front, means that effectively we're looking at an effectively 2-storey building in scale from the relative next door neighbour side. I think that's stated by the planners in their commentary in regards to it. Again, it is a big building, there's no doubt about that. It does have a bulk. I also look next door, and if you look at the plans and the trees next door, there is significant trees and therefore separation from the actual residences of the properties in Tasman Street by those trees. I think there's a reference to the fact that they're deciduous and therefore they lose their leaves during the winter. So yes, there's no doubt this building will be far more seen during the winter months when the leaves are not on the trees. And yes, the trees could be chopped down, but in relation to taking away sunlight, they're currently already taking sunlight away from those backyards as they stand, the trees that are there. So whilst we might argue that, you know, the sunlight is the amenity we're looking for, the fact that the trees are in there are actually almost dealing with that issue now. So I can't see that as a relevant consideration in relation to it. As comment in regard to the overshadowing, the blocks are big. There is more than 24 square metres of private open space in the backyards of all those properties in Tasman Street. And as a consequence of that, the overshadowing does meet the standard as determined in relation to it. So I will be supporting this development today.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. The seconder, Councillor Kai. Not at this point. Councillor Walker, do you wish to ask a question or speak? Sure.
Yeah, I will rise to support this, and I do understand the representative's position as well as other representatives who have put their case forward. I'm not sure if you were here earlier, but you might have heard a quite intense discussion about the amenity of adjoining neighbours and how difficult it is even for this council to, in a situation where someone's backyard is being overlooked, to get provisions that can protect that. In this case, and while I agree that whilst the trees do provide that shade in your yard and others, that is by choice that you have those trees there. I don't know if that should be taken into consideration in relation to the proposed building. I think that convolutes the matter somewhat. I think we should be looking at the building in isolation and what that does, and indeed will cast some shadow to your backyard. Certainly, I can understand why that is of concern, but it's certainly not in the planning scheme something that, and I'm sure you'd recognise that it is not something that we can make a decision to stop that occurring based on the planning scheme. And things do change, and it is not always desirable. And in this case, I'm sure the trees will probably remain in your yard, and hopefully the foliage on the other side will also soften the effects of what is proposed. But it's clear that because the facade of the property is being maintained, there is that context of the local character of the neighbourhood which will remain. You might see a different view from your particular vantage point, but for most of us, that will remain reasonably unchanged because of the nature of the block sloping away. And of course, you do have quite an interesting block of flats quite close to you that are probably out of context in the local neighbourhood, but they've been there maybe almost as long as you have. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, it does provide that there is a bit of a mixture of use in that area, albeit the case that predominantly a large number of single-storey dwellings, houses. So yes, I certainly hear your concerns. I will be supporting it today, and I certainly appreciate people making representation. I think what's important in these situations is that you are heard. I know that in this case, your position won't carry the day, with me at least, but it's important that you're heard and that these considerations are all made by councillors. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any other contributions from around the table? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. And is carried. The council no longer sits as a planning authority. The time is approaching 3 o'clock. We'll have a 10-minute break and reconvene at 3:10. Thank you. that councillors Pentridge and councillor Walker have not made their way back. I hope they're okay. So they may join us. So we recommence the meeting with item 11. 11.1, the Mayor's announcements are listed there up until the time of the agenda closing. Would love to recognise yesterday, the 8th of March, that our community development team hosted a really wonderful grassroots morning tea for International Women's Day in collaboration with the Nepalese Society and the Red Cross. It was really lovely in Newnham to be able to hear stories and see some Nepalese dancing from members of our community and to hear inspirational stories. Welcome back, Councillor Walker and Pentridge together at 3:12. To hear inspirational stories of those making a difference in our community. Are there any questions with regard to the Mayor's announcements at 11.1? Let's move to item 12, Councillors' reports. Councillor Mackenzie.
Just like to acknowledge that I attended on behalf of the Mayor the launch of the Launceston City Football Club last night down at Buckby Motors. Although they don't reside in our boundaries, it was still nice to see a very fulsome group of people there and enjoying themselves, and look forward to a good season.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I was fortunate enough to head along to the 2023 Soggy Bottom Regatta at the last-minute location at the Cataract Gorge First Basin. The night before, it was not looking like just the Soggy Bottom, but the soggy everything because of the weather. But contrary to that, the sun shone on a beautiful Launceston autumn day, and I commend the Rotarians groups and the participants involved for whipping it all together in about 2 weeks from moving from the Waverley Lakes. Whilst Anthony Brown and I teamed up and barely got out of the starters blocks before sinking faster than Jane Cameron's Avatar 2 at the box office, a congratulations to Rotarian Sonia Smith and her crew, who absolutely annihilated us. She won both of her races. And if the feedback is there, I look forward to further supporting the event at that potential location because it shows a lot of growth. There was a lot of foot traffic. There was a lot of spectators and a lot of community interest at the gorge, which was great. I was also able to have a really great conversation with Will Smith from JCP, who was able to express some expressions of interest with some upcoming conversations that we'll have around facilities in our venue. So a great place to converse as well. And just briefly, may I also commend and recognise the Relay for Life team and teams for their indoor-outdoor event, and again voice my support for the future growth of that event if they wish to continue it in that new location.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other contributions? Item 13, 13.1, Councillor's question on notice. 13.1.1, Councillor Kai with a question on the QV Mag volunteer guides. 13.1.2, Councillor Harris on the St Leonard's residential strategy. Councillors' questions without notice. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I just really want to raise an issue that occurred this week. We, as a council, are often held to account in relation to things that we sometimes don't do as well as we should. And I'd have to say this week I was very disappointed to read the letters to the editor of the Examiner in relation to an event that purportedly occurred at our swimming pool. And I think, A, it showed very poor fact-checking before it was actually put in the paper. And moreover, the response the next day, once the fact check was found not to be correct, I thought was absolutely appalling. It was hidden down in the bottom of the letters to the editor, and if you didn't know what was there, you wouldn't have even seen it. So I'm just wondering, is the City Council doing anything in relation to that particular article?
Thank you for the question. I can speak and then the CEO can add anything further. Firstly, Councillor Mackenzie, as Mayor and as I'm sure councillors, I was very disappointed with the events that transpired over the past week, all which were based on nothing more than fiction and a series of mistruths. So in light of that and wanting to set the record straight, the facts are that our local newspaper published a fake letter, earlier this week regarding an incident that was perpetrated to have occurred at the Aquatic Centre, And let me categorically state that no such incident has or did occur at our facility. In fact, importantly, the centre has never had a single reported issue or incident regarding a trans person using the facilities at the Aquatic Centre. Not one. Disappointingly, the newspaper made no attempt to check the veracity of the letter with the council. The publishing of this letter has, as you would expect, resulted in considerable angst and grief for council staff, particularly those at the front desk at the Aquatic Centre, and indeed those on the ends of the telephone who continue to be the subject of ongoing abuse. So I know I have, and I'm sure other councillors have also received additional information and letters concerning this, the tone of which is less than desirable. What I would say is that we reached out very early on the day the letter was published to the Examiner newspaper. The editor, the new editor, responded by falling on his sword and saying that it was inappropriate and they didn't undertake any fact-checking of the letter, and that a retraction or apology would be provided. Indeed, if that's what you call what was included in the newspaper the next day, that itself is very disappointing. We did reach out to that media outlet with regard to a request to have the online story taken down, and that did occur, I think, by about 11:30 on the day, despite our request for it to occur much earlier. So I want to say it's not a reflection of the local government reporter, but indeed on the editorial practices at the newspaper. CEO, anything further you'd like to add? Any additional questions without notice? Councillor Pentridge.
One of the things that I'm quite concerned about is the constant referral in the paper of council or councillors' decisions that I don't know anything about. Now, they've obviously been made through delegated powers, and I think it's long overdue that we, at one of our workshops, we can sit down and question the delegated powers or be told about them, right? I mean, how much say do we, the councillors, really have? Why are we just here to fill the seats?
Well, Councillor Pentridge, look, I certainly value your opinion and question, but I'll need a little more detail. I mean, the Mayor, as the delegated spokesperson of the council, speaks on decisions or things that have been determined by the council. I'm happy for us to take an investigation further into an example.
I accept that. But can we have a workshop on delegated powers? And would it be inappropriate that, considering we've got 7 new aldermen that have become part of the 12, shouldn't we have some say, or at least be told, what authority have we got and what authority has already been handed over by past councils that we know nothing about?
So, just to be clear, you're probably not talking about the newspaper, you're talking...
No, I'm just talking about in general.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So, the
Delegated
role of CEO and General Manager or delegated authority specifically, correct?
That's it. That's
Yep.
it.
So, the opportunity to explore the role of delegated authority, there's a workshop scheduled, I believe? Next workshop.
Yep.
So, that is great.
Thank you.
Appreciated. Thank you. Any other questions without notice? Okay, let's move on to 14.1, the Cultural Advisory Committee meeting held on the 1st of February. That Council receives the report from the Cultural Advisory Committee held on the 1st of February. Someone to move. Councillor Walker, thank you. A seconder. Councillor Britton. Councillor Walker as the mover and chair of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, was nominated as chairperson of the committee. Thank you very much. And you'll see listed there quite a few updates that the committee has got. I think I've said before in this chamber that certainly the Cultural Advisory Committee covers a broad range and, of areas that the council work in, and I think that range is getting broader. Certainly a update on the Aboriginal Partnership Plan, which we will be looking at a bit later, the activation of the CBD, including Christmas activations, something which the council is keen to address, and also just a general sort of engagement and awareness of the public arts strategy that has been ongoing with council as well, and something that the committee will certainly be involved in. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Britton, seconder. Any other councillor with regard to 14.1? Councillor Walker, anything further? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. 14.2, Tender Review Committee meeting held on the 23rd of February. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, a seconder. Councillor Walker. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just to note that it was good to see that we had some reasonably good competition for this particular role, and it's also pleasing to see it's a local Tasmanian company that's been awarded the tender.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Walker.
Launceston Council certainly manages, I forget the number of bridges, but quite a large amount of these facilities in our municipality, and it was a very competitive process, which was great to see. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any other contributions? Councillor Mackenzie, nothing further. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. 14.3, the audit panel meeting held on the 21st of February. Someone to move. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to say that the details are there in the report. Ongoing work that the audit committee does, which is rotated through the meetings and through the year in regards to the various statutory roles that the audit committee, our audit panel do fulfil. I'm enjoying the process and the veracity of in which the panel members approach all of their various tasks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mackenzie. Any councillor to 14.3, the audit panel? Councillor Walker, nothing further. Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. We now move to the Community and Place Network, page 71, item 15.1, the Public Art Strategy 2023 to 2031. The Council endorses the Public Art Strategy. The Council notes the intention to develop an implementation framework with actions aligned to the strategy objectives once the strategy is endorsed. Someone to move. Deputy Mayor has moved. Someone to second. Councillor Walker. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And firstly, thank you to GM Ryan for his correspondence and activity around this and the recognition of public art, and that potential previous requirements were quite tedious. So continuing to identify and embrace our arts and cultural identity is something that I believe is very important, beyond just the visual and experiential experiences, but also to invest the ownership into our region. We heard earlier from Inspector Nathan Jones that there is quite a bit of antisocial behaviour, and in my view, finding opportunities for members of our community to be involved in the installations or the like will hopefully assist in taking some pride in our place.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other contributions around the public art strategy? Councillor Mackenzie.
I just really want to stand to endorse the work that's been done by Lou on this. I think it's been fantastic collaboration to pull together what I think is a really wholesome public art policy. Public art is a challenging area because where does it stop, where does it start, who owns it, who looks after it, all those sorts of things, but it's all been referenced in our strategy policy, strategy document, and so I think it's a really good start. I'm sure there'll be things we'll add to it and subtract to it over time, but I think it's fantastic that we're making a positive direction with it.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, and we note Councillor Dawkins departs at 3:25. Are there any further? Councillor Walker.
Yes, as seconder of the motion, thank you.
Yes, good.
Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, we are a creative city. I think Launceston punches well above its weight when it comes to our creative output, our creative content, our creative history and heritage, including our Aboriginal history and heritage, all the way through to our modern theatre and dance and youth groups and things like that. The list goes on and on. This is another expression of that, and as Councillor Mackenzie says, it will go through some process of adaptation and adoption as things go on, not least of which will be the tension, I think, between the old and new. Our cultural heritage includes our built heritage. Our cultural heritage includes our Aboriginal heritage. And so those are tensions that will be addressed as part of an ongoing physical public expression of visual arts. And that is something that I do believe is addressed through the strategy, and something that will continue to be addressed both by this chamber but also by our committees, our various committees, whether it's the Heritage Committee, the Youth Committee or so on. And I think that this engagement and this celebration of our cultural content in this city is something that we'll all justifiably be proud of as this develops over the next decade. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, and again, apologies for missing you as the seconder. Any other contributions? Councillor McMahon.
I was just going to reiterate what Amanda Pera said to us today, that art is inclusive, cohesive, communicative, art contributes to social change. So I'm very pleased to endorse the new public art strategy.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Any other contributions? Deputy Mayor, would you like to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 10-0. 15.2, the Heritage Advisory Committee, appointment of community reps, the appointment of Bruce Carter, Dr John Forge and Rosalind Ives as community representative members of the Heritage Advisory Committee, as well as the reappointment of Les Penzas to the role for a third term. Someone to move said recommendation. Moved, Councillor Kai. Seconder, Councillor Walker. Councillor Kai, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you. On Wednesday, the 15th of February, I attended the first Council Heritage Advisory Committee meeting with Councillor Pentridge. At this meeting, we encountered a problem. So there was not enough members attending to form a quorum. After farewelling the two retiring members, Roy Foyley from the National Trust of Tasmania and Dr Anne Neal, a volunteer community representative, we had to hold an informal meeting with no decision making being possible. To avoid this from happening in the future meetings, appointing 4 community representatives instead of the past 2 members would ensure enough representatives would be present for a quorum. A total of 12 members would form the committee. Community members are volunteers giving their time, energy, knowledge freely, respecting the fact that they and the 5 organisational representatives might not always be able to attend our meetings due to other priorities or illnesses. It would be wise to affirm the recommendation for these 4 selected community members. So as we are the council that will benefit from these community committees, I would recommend whatever the word.
Thanks, Councillor Kai.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker as the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. As a recent previous member, along with Councillor Mackenzie of the Heritage Committee, I'm happy to stand here to second this motion and to acknowledge Anne Neal and Ray Foley, who have been on that committee as long as I was, and both with a huge knowledge when it comes to our built heritage. And I'm sure both 2 people who would continue to take an interest, and certainly council would thank them. When it comes to these new community members, Bruce Carrera is someone who has worked as a heritage builder for many years. In fact, I have to declare an interest. I did used to work for Bruce in his timber workshop, and I can vouch for his attention to detail when it comes to restoring heritage buildings in Launceston. And he has a keen and active awareness and interest in all things heritage. Certainly Rosalind Ives, I also know personally, and her interest in Launceston's community in general, but specifically also in heritage, I would say is second to none, insofar as she makes herself very available to people in regards to standing up for those values that we share here at Launceston Council. Dr. John Forge, I cannot speak for, but I look forward to finding out more about, and I look forward to the work that the Heritage Committee do, especially in regards to the formation of the future heritage precincts, as we'll see over the coming year. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, I'm here to support the motion as well, but I also want just to acknowledge Ray Foley, who actually I think is the reason why the Heritage Advisory Committee exists. I think he spoke to the then Mayor many, many years ago and suggested that we needed to have something in place in his role, I think, as a Chair of National Trust at that point in time. So Ray's been a font of valuable information over many years, as has Anne. Both contributed significantly to, I think, our Heritage Advisory values. Not just on our committee, but I think in general within the city. So I'm really saddened to see them go, but really acknowledge the body of work both of them put into the committee and so forth. Look forward to the enthusiasm of the new members. I know of Bruce, and I know Bruce actually has won one of our Heritage Awards in the past, so he's certainly a great contributor to the heritage aspects of Launceston. The other two I can't speak to, but there was the fourth one, which was Les Pensis, who's been with us, and a well-known architect in and around Launceston, who actually has a huge interest in heritage matters. So really, really good, looking forward to the good work that you will do.
Thanks, Councillor McKenzie. Any other contributions? Councillor Kai, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 10-0. To the Creative Arts and Cultural Services Network we go. 16.1, 10 days on the island, remission of fees and charges. Councillor McKenzie is moving. Councillor Pentridge is seconding. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and I think this is a really good step forward in relation to some of these cultural events that we support. I think they need to be done on a case-by-case basis to ensure that they're not getting funding from elsewhere and then all of a sudden receiving additional funding from us. But I know, and there's probably others that will come up in due course where we give them a grant and then we take it away with the fees that we charge over time. So I think it's a really good thing for us to be contemplating in relation to an event like this.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Pentridge.
And once again, I think Councillor McKenzie made a good point that we give it to on one hand and take it off on the other. I'd like to, another thing, rather than make a statement here, I wish we could bring it up in one of our workshops, that especially events. And then last Sunday, I had the pleasure of representing Mr. Mayor and the council in issuing awards for their own. It was a beautiful day, and we had a lot of young people there who participated. I was a bit disappointed at the end that I found that even though struggling for money and for finance, and there have been a few other little things happen, which is neither here nor there, but that we were charging them $1,500 for the use of the park, and then failed to really assist in supplying garbage tins. So why can't we have a bit of a look, and particularly where children are involved, can't we sort of make some sort of concession, and does there have to be a fee charged?
Thanks,
it's something maybe we should all discuss, it's not between us.
Thank you. So just so you know, the review of the event strategy is coming forward, and no doubt that will be included. But just to clarify, I sent you an email earlier today. The charge was $320 for Royal Park. Just to clarify.
It just must be inflation.
You're welcome. Are there any other contributions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Speaking to the arts and cultural strategies, we all know that Tasmania, and in particular Launceston, they are thriving hubs of creative activity. And if we have the intention in which I feel like this council has outlined and the interest in the arts and culture, then yes, I'd like to support the movement of taking the remission of fees and charges from 10 days, but in also confining in what Councillor McKenzie said, doing it on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, I think 10 days is a good start.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other contributions? Councillor Walker.
So a contribution, perhaps a question. Reading from the report, it's been identified in this case in order to provide further transparency in the support that council provides to this event, that this remission of relevant fees and charges be formalised by council. I suppose, am I to presume that we, because this agreement we have had for a few years, have previously provided this but not documented it or not formalised it, or is that an incorrect assumption?
General Manager Shane Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Councillor. In response to that, these remission of fees and charges are applying to the collaborative project that QBMag is doing with 10 Days on the Island. Previous years, QBMag hasn't supported the activities that have gone there, so that hasn't been an occurrence. And because the gallery spaces are listed in the fees and charges schedule, it's a requirement that they'll bring those forward to council for that consideration. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, General Manager. And of course, notwithstanding that 10 Days will have signed an agreement that would have referred to there being no further support. So this would sit against that, and legal advice has suggested that formalising this is the way to go. Councillor Palmer departs at 3:38.
And to just speak to the item, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and of course, as our deputy mentioned, to support these things, of course, is a great thing for council. In real terms, it doesn't cost us a lot, and in real outcomes, it gains us a huge amount. So wherever and whenever we can do that, including the example of Councillor Pentridge, when it comes to especially our young people participating in events, where and when we can reduce or remove these fees to help facilitate these kinds of activities, of course, it is a good thing, and I look forward to that review that you mentioned.
Great, thank you, Councillor Walker. Appreciate it. Any other contributions? So we just note for the record, Councillor Palmer has declared a late interest in item 16.1. Thus, that is the reason that he has withdrawn from the consideration of this item. Councillor McKenzie, do you wish to close? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. And we welcome back Councillor Palmer into the room at 3:39. We now move to Infrastructure and Assets Network 17.1, Cataract Gorge Reserve Advisory Committee, appointment of community representatives. The council appoints Anne Povey, Tracy Mallett, Denise Delphin and Sherilyn Parker as community representative members to the Cataract Gorge Advisory Committee. It's moved Councillor Walker, a seconder, Councillor Kai. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is the time of year for appointing community representatives, it would seem. I am happy to welcome Anna Povey back to the Cataract Gorge Committee. She provides a wealth of knowledge in regards, and it's listed in the report, over 30 years experience in bushland conservation. You might be wandering through the gorge as I do and see a plant and not know if it's a weed or if it's a native, no idea. And quite often they are quite similar too. So, by all accounts, it's easy to do. But and is someone who, and I should say, is someone who can provide great assistance there. Not that we don't have that type of expertise also on our council as well, council officers. Tracy Mallet might be a name that is familiar to councillors and to the council. Someone who has previously worked here, now has left the organisation, but joins us again through this role, and also her role with Tourism Northern Tasmania, is it called, I do believe? Oh, they changed their name. Visit North, I thought they'd changed their name. Denise Adelphin, of course, would be a name that is familiar to many, many people in Launceston, and the amount of years that she has been involved in the northern suburbs especially, but community ventures in general. And Sherilyn Parker, who I'm yet to meet, but I am reliably informed, is a part of Malathina Tiakana Warana Aboriginal Corporation in the northeast of Tasmania, as well as working in a library in Launceston. So it brings a wide range of expertise and information, but also just that community representation, that broad sort of input that comes from that wide range. On that, they're all women, and it is the case that you know, normally we might be working towards trying to get more women in representative roles, and in this case, we've exceeded that particular goal. So that's a great thing. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, and I should also, you know, mention, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but just to mention Don Deffendurfer, who has resigned after many, many years, a little bit like Ray Foley with the Heritage Committee. He's a long-term commitment to the Cataract Gorge Committee that he's chosen to no longer partake in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Kai. Any councillor wish to speak to 17.1? Councillor Walker, anything further? We'll put it to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present, and the motion is carried. Item 18.1 in the Organisational Services Network. Financial report to Council, 31st of December 2022. Moved Councillor McKenzie, a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And look, it's nice to see that we're 700,000 or thereabouts in front of budget, which is really pleasing. But I think just needs to unpack a little bit the numbers that are included in there. I think they're all well explained in what's been presented to us today. But I think key elements of things that I just looked through and take a little bit of a pot shot at it. It's really interesting to see that our waste centre income is down, which is a bit surprising, and I hope that means there's no dumping going around the community, but certainly that's a little concerning given that we're expecting to see an increase in that. Good to see our on-street parking using that Easy Park app has actually improved our revenue from parking, which means people are using the on-street parking, which is fantastic. Somewhat offset by the reduction in the number of people going into our car parks, but still a good positive result, which I think is sort of laying lift to the fact that people aren't coming into the city. Clearly that parking revenue is a bit of a bellwether in regards to that. Also good to see that we're doing our infringement notices, because I think there for a while I thought that the Easy Park app would probably reduce the amount of fines, and I think it did for a period of time, but clearly there are people still infringing out there, and they're probably more, I'd suggest, on the non-parking meter ones with the 2-hour parking limits, which are now being more vigilantly policed because we've got a full complement of people. Increase in our interest, which is good. That's good for us that have got money in the bank. Not so good for those that are paying interest on mortgages, but we have significant funds on deposit, so it's great to see that we're actually improving in that area from our perspective. Sort of plus and a minus, the fact that we're something like 1.7 favourable in our wages, I think is a little concerning, even though it's good from the bottom line point of view. It's not good from the point of view of the number of people that we probably are showing as not in the workforce that we should have, and that's somewhat offset by an unfavourable variance in contractors. But But fundamentally, I think it's something that, whilst it's great for the bottom line, it's not necessarily great from an organisational point of view to be running potentially at a level lower than what we should be from our employment line. Noting that the flood from last year, I think I sent a report out today about the outcomes of the flood from October last year, and noting that that's cost us in direct money about $200,000 to actually respond to the flood and deal with the damages and various things like that. So just noting that doesn't come without any cost to us as well. And also noting a significant increase in our depreciation, which I think are well explained as to why that's the case, of about $1 million. But having said that, it's still overall a pretty good result for the first half of the year, and long may it lead to more positive variances at the end of the year. Hopefully not coming out of the employees that we don't have, because I think that's something we really need to increase the numbers that we've got.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I was going to just ask a couple of questions to begin with. Yeah, that contract labour, I know that I suppose historically over summer, when it comes to labour, and a large part of that being our operations in the field and the waste centre, that we have previously taken on contract labour over summer. Grass grows faster, it's pretty straightforward. Does this figure take that into account, or because is this variance because of that seasonal effect, or is it over and above that?
General Manager Shane.
So the unfavourable variance in contract labour is purely due to vacancies within our operational teams at the moment in terms of delivering our business as usual services. So things like the seasonal work, you say, that all gets delivered by our own staff, but particularly in the civil area and the waste centre, we've had long-standing vacancies just due to challenges in the marketplace at the moment.
So then would it be fair to say that in your mind, if not on paper, you could offset this variance, unfavourable variance with the savings or the reduction in spending in labour in general?
Look, that's correct. Of course, it's not as ideal to use temporary labour long term. That obviously they're not as connected to the services or have the competencies that our own staff can have. So, but I would expect to see that continue for maybe the next couple of years.
Thank you. I will just speak to the item if I can. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just thought I'd make that point because it is, part of the nature of the changing world that we live in. Of course, we like to have positions filled, and we'd encourage that at all levels. But it is also the case that it's a competitive market, a changing market, people choosing to work from home, and all types of things that the council has been flexible with as well, I suppose, and employing contractors, I suppose. We do that in the field. We also do that, in the office as well when it comes to, commissioning various reports and work that is done. So that is part of the changing nature of the workforce, I suppose. So how long we make those variances and at what point we incorporate more, I suppose that is, an accountancy question, I suppose, to some degree. Notwithstanding all of that, yes, it is, of course, good to see a favourable sort of balance and to see them listed in detail. It gives the public as well as councillors that opportunity to just see the changing nature of parking, for example, as Councillor Mackenzie spoke to, and I'm sure many other inferences that you can make by looking at that. And just to bear in mind that, nothing is static in life. Everything fluxes and changes, and that will, no doubt continue. We went through a very topsy-turvy period that did have a big effect on our bottom line, and it's our ability now to respond to those continuing ripples and effects that will mean, our success. We do enjoy that interest return at the moment. That would seem to be, something that will be sustained for quite a period. But it's also the case that our cash reserves are also, by and large, earmarked for other projects and repayments and things like that. So even that will come and go with some certain amount of flux over the next 1 to 2 years, I suppose you would say. But while it is in our favour at the moment, we enjoy that extra $600,000, $700,000 coming in to the books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Are there any other contributions to 18.1? Councillor Mackenzie, anything further?
Just to complete, I think just on that whole wage, I think our loss is probably the community's gain, because I think what's happened is we're in a competitive environment. We're losing a lot of skilled officers to businesses who can actually pay significant amounts of money because they're very, very busy. And I think that's positive from the point of view of what's going on in Launceston, but it just does put some challenges to the services that we provide. But I think it's a good result in a difficult market.
Okay, let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present, and the motion is carried. Item 19.1, the Draft Aboriginal Partnership Plan. It's moved Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Pintridge. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to move this. Council has been through an elongated process of developing and getting right an important policy, and I'm sure Council is probably sick of hearing me say it, but I will say it again, that it's probably one of the most important things we will do as a council. That's what I feel anyway, as a council. And, you know, really, this council's been here 170 years or so. I'd say it's one of the more important things we've done in that 170 years. We have a strong desire and responsibility to respond to the needs of Aboriginal people in the Launceston region. That's what the report starts by saying. That desire has to come in the form of a consultative, considerate and communicative, measured approach. That is the approach that has been taken, and I give my thanks to the CEO for leading this process to this point, where we have consulted widely with various members of the Aboriginal community, where we have been backwards and forwards. We've had responses, both positive and negative, through our social media or our community responses. And I note even that, you know, some of those need to be turned off because of the derogatory responses that we have received. I haven't been privy to those. I don't need to be privy to those. I've seen many of those before, and I'll speak out loud and proud right now and say that you know, these things won't be tolerated. We've moved too far beyond those days as a society. Right? We are moving towards a time of true reconciliation with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, and that takes the community to walk together with our Aboriginal community, not to create division, not to even to question the Aboriginal community's right to make decisions on their own behalf over matters that concern them. That's what respect involves. When it comes to any relationship you have in life, that's what respect involves, allowing someone to make their own decisions in life. In this case, allowing the Aboriginal community that contribution to their community, to our community. That's something that we're going to enjoy having in Launceston as a result of this Aboriginal Partnership Plan. It's available for anyone to have a look at. It's something that really encourages the communication to develop between this council, who represents the whole community, and the Aboriginal community, which of course represents a section of our community, but indeed an extremely, not important, but special part of our community. They are the bearers of a culture that has been on this island for a very long time, up to 40,000 years. They are the bearers of information about our ecology, about our fauna and flora. They are the bearers of cultural information that is part of their culture, part of their embodiment of who they are as people. And it's something that is to be respected, but also admired, that the tenacity of people to continue to bring that into the 21st century and our opportunity to be a part of that journey. And so I commend this Aboriginal Partnership Plan on that basis. And long may Launceston Council reach out its hand, not just to the Aboriginal community, but to other communities, other cultural communities that we represent, and work with them in order for them to celebrate and recognise their cultural interests and essentially that identity of who they are. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Pentridge? No. Councillor Mackenzie?
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Walker. I think you're probably responsible for us getting to this stage, or getting to a stage where we actually went in a slightly different direction where we intended to go 3 to 4 years ago. I'd like just to commend the CEO and the team around him who have helped develop this, and the conversations that you've had with the Aboriginal people to get to where we are. I think what I've learned from this, it's a very iterative process. It's not something that stands still. It will continue to grow over time, and it will mould itself as the Aboriginal community gets more comfortable in talking to us. So I'm really pleased. I think even going through the workshop last week where it showed how the plan had changed from the original structure, just in the words and the terminologies and things like that, just trying to be sensitive to the Aboriginal people as to what was important to them, showed, I think, that we were listening and that we really are genuinely on this journey with them. So I certainly endorse this plan and look forward to it evolving over the next 150 years or more.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Any other contributions? Deputy Mayor, I wonder if you could have the chair for a moment.
Would you like to speak?
Thank you. Yes, I would. Thank you. Look, I want to say that I'm really proud to see us arrive at this point. And this isn't news, this strategy. This is us catching up to what has been needed for so long in our community. A way of recognising that our First Nations people have such an important role to play in our community in educating us about guiding and sharing a way forward. And what we're saying in the development of this first community engagement Aboriginal Partnership Plan is that we are willing and wanting to go on that journey with you. We're wanting to listen, we're wanting to engage, but we're also wanting, importantly, to learn. So for me, this strategy or community engagement framework is just the beginning. And there'll be some words and some phrases and some actions that won't be right, that won't appeal to all members of the Aboriginal community. But what I want to say is that our journey to get here has been a really genuine one. And the number of elders and groups and representatives that we've spoken to has been wholesome and has been fully explored to understand that, like in any pocket of our community, there are differing views in the Aboriginal community. So what I think this document does is says that we are now fully ready to go on the journey of learning, of recognising. We are fully committed to the words that we say at the beginning of our council meeting in terms of an acknowledgement of country, and that we want to extend the hand and to go in partnership with our Aboriginal members of our Aboriginal community who are valued and recognised in Launceston. So, CEO, others have said, but I'll say it as well, we thank you for leading this project. Councillor Walker, I thank you for the way that you have guided us in learning, in being educated, in being informed, and taking serious and sensible steps to engage with our Aboriginal community. And I think if we treat this as the start rather than the finish, then our community will bode well from what can be gained by working in partnership with our Aboriginal community. Thank you so much. Councillor Walker, do you wish to close? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, raise their hand. That is all councillors present, and the motion is carried. Someone to move, please, that we move into closed council. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Moved, Deputy Mayor. Seconded, Councillor Britton. All those in favour, raise their hand. That is all councillors present, And we now move into closed. And at 4:06, we now move into open session. The recommendation that Council resolves to report in open session that's considered the matters, the minutes, the 9th of February, and 3 lots of leave of absence. Someone to move? Deputy Mayor has moved. Seconder is Councillor Walker. All those in favour raise their hand. Councillor Pentridge as well. Yep, that is all councillors present. The motion is carried, and I'll close the meeting at 4:07. Thank you so much.